So a case challenging the NFA and its restrictions on SBRs is now in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court just took interest in the case by demanding that the Trump DOJ respond to this issue. With Congress recently passing the $0 tax on suppressors and SBRs in the Big Beautiful Bill, this case is now even more important, especially because the Supreme Court is taking interest in this issue. So let's break down what is happening in this critical case. Now, before we jump into this video, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Silent. Now, let's face it, we all know that our phones and other electronic devices like laptops are actually just tracking devices. Big tech, government agencies, and even cyber criminals, they're all collecting our data, and they're doing that through some of our devices. That's why it's always a good option to maybe look into, Faraday bags and other options, and I highly recommend Silent. Their Faraday gear and these bags and other items you can get block all wireless signals, cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and a lot of other signals that, government agencies, hackers, all these people use to get into your devices. I use their backpack every single day when I'm going to and from the office. I put my laptop in there, my phone in there, and then also I use it a lot when I'm going through airports or when I'm staying at hotels because, again, I want to protect those devices and I don't want people to get access to my devices, to my phone, or to my laptop. So again, if you're interested, you can protect your privacy, your freedom, and all of your family and your devices by just simply using a Faraday bag. I highly recommend Silent. You can go to silent.com/scholar and you can get 15% off and a free shipping as well on these products. Again, simply just go to slnt.com/scholar. And again, I will link that all down below in the details section and also in the pinned comment. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be talking about a new case and an important NFA challenge that is now in front of the Supreme Court. This case is called U.S. versus Robinson, and it's a challenge to the NFA and its SBR restrictions. Now, in this petition just filed, the plaintiffs asked for the Supreme Court to find that the NFA's restrictions are unconstitutional under the Second Amendment as they apply to SBRs and those restrictions. This is a case that was ruled on by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and in that decision, the court there found that the NFA does not violate the Second Amendment. They found that the NFA's SBR restrictions are constitutional even in light of what the Supreme Court has said in recent decisions like Bruin, Rahimi, Heller, and others. This has now prompted Mr. Robinson to seek Supreme Court review on that decision. The Trump DOJ also recently decided that they wanted to waive the whole right to reply to this case at the Supreme Court level, and after that, the Supreme Court set conference on this issue. However, we just got an update in this case. The Supreme Court issued an order, and they are ordering that the Trump DOJ file a response in this NFA SBR challenge. This is great news because this is the second NFA SBR challenge that's in the Supreme Court where the Trump DOJ was waiving their right to respond. They were hoping that the Supreme Court would not take interest in this case and would just go to conference and then be denied. But instead, the Supreme Court has taken interest in these NFA cases and they're ordering that the Trump DOJ respond to this issue. Now, the facts around this case are interesting. On September 9th, 2022, law enforcement officers responded to a complaint that there was a suspicious vehicle parked outside of a home in Florida. And the officers arrived at the scene. They observed that Mr. Robinson was in the driver's seat. He was asleep. They shined a light through the driver's window and they saw that, of course, he was asleep, but they also saw a rifle and a buttstock. The police officers woke up Mr. Robinson. He then, did not respond appropriately. He did not, exit the vehicle. Instead, he tried to drive away. Eventually, they stopped him, detained him, searched the vehicle, and they found an SBR in the vehicle, and they also found a separate upper, I believe it was a 16-inch upper of a rifle, also within the vehicle. After that, they searched the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record, and it revealed that the rifle there, the SBR, was not registered under the NFA. It was not registered to Mr. Robinson. As a result, he was charged with violating the NFA, and after a bench trial, the district court actually ruled against Mr. Robinson and then imposed a sentence of 18 months probation, and then he also got 6 months of house arrest as a result of violating the NFA. Mr. Robinson then appealed his conviction up to the 11th Circuit, and he argued that the statute that his conviction was based on violates the Second Amendment in light of Bruin and a lot of the other Supreme Court precedents, and he argued that the NFA is unconstitutional as well as a tax. However, on review, the 11th Circuit rejected all of Mr. Robinson's Second Amendment claims along with that tax argument. They stated that Miller already found that short-barreled shotguns are dangerous and unusual firearms and therefore could be restricted. They believe that there is no meaningful distinction between short-barreled shotguns and short-barreled rifles, and therefore Miller stands as a valid precedent against SBRs, and essentially because of that, they can uphold the NFA's restrictions on SBRs. They stated that until the Supreme Court changes their decisions or clarifies this whole SBR issue, they are bound by what Miller said. Now, in rejecting the whole tax argument that was brought up against the NFA, they claim that Bruin's decision forecloses that type of tax argument, since Bruin contemplated that some objective restrictions like fees and tests would be permissible under the Second Amendment, and they're quoting heavily to dicta by Justice Kavanaugh. Well, now that ruling is up for review in the Supreme Court. In the petition, the two questions presented for the Supreme Court to consider are whether federal criminal punishment of the possession of an unregistered short-barreled rifle violates the Second Amendment. Also, whether federal criminal punishment of the possession of an unregistered SBR exceeds Congress's taxing powers under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution, and also violates the 10th Amendment. In the petition here, Mr. Robinson rejects the notion that Miller stands for the whole proposition that SBRs are not protected arms. They argue that since SBRs are protected arms, the federal government bears the burden under Bruin to show that there is a history and tradition to support this whole registration and taxation scheme. They state that the government has not met that burden, and they did not show that in the lower court. They point out that the colonial era laws that the government uses to justify the NFA have a completely different purpose. The purpose of those colonial era laws was to essentially make sure that the population was sufficiently armed so that they actually had these types of weapons, and the whole purpose was not to disarm them like what the NFA does. They argue that the fundamental how and why and operation of those colonial era laws was drastically different, so the government here cannot now rely on them to justify the NFA. Now, recently, the Trump DOJ waived their ability to respond to the petition, and they indicated that they would only actually do so if the Supreme Court ordered them to file that response. Well, we just got an order from the Supreme Court, and they ordered that the Trump DOJ file a response on this case, and that is going to be due September 19th. This is now the second NFA SBR case that's dealing with the Second Amendment and tax issues that has now been brought to the Supreme Court, and it's the second time that the Trump DOJ attempted to waive a response. Essentially, they wanted this to go to conference without further briefs, and they were hoping that the Supreme Court would just outright deny it. However, the Supreme Court in both of these cases have now ordered that the Trump DOJ file a response. The other case I'm mentioning, which deals with the whole NFA issue and SBRs, that is the Rush versus US case. The response in that Rush case is due September 2nd. So really what we would probably see is the Trump DOJ will argue on the second, mainly in the Rush case, and then whatever they argue in that brief will then also probably be submitted or be very similar to what they submit to the Robinson case on September 19th. This also likely means that these two NFA SBR challenges will be briefed and then go to the Supreme Court for conference at the same time. Now, the recent NFA tax changes that happened with the whole Big Beautiful bill and the $0, tax that's going to be put in place January 1st of next year, that's caused a significant dilemma and, a kind of upheaval in some of the laws where potentially the Supreme Court is now interested in this whole SBR issue, and maybe they're now interested in taking these cases, but at the very least, they are showing some sort of interest in these cases by ordering that the Trump DOJ file a response in both of these NFA SBR challenges. So that's what's currently going on in these critical NFA SBR challenges that are in the Supreme Court. As it develops more, as we get more information, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is to subscribe to the channel. Also, you can check out my website, armscholar.com. Over there, we have channel merch and other things that you guys can check out. We also have the free legal guide that you guys can get. All you have to do is put in your email and we send you over a free PDF. I will link that down below as well. And then we send some follow-up emails as well, just additional educational information. So as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. But never forget, this nation was built by Armed Scholars, and this nation will be maintained by Armed Scholars.